It happened overnight. No warning. No knock. No note. When my neighbor woke up, his van was gone. The same van he depended on to leave the house. The same van fitted for his disability. The same van parked there for years without a single issue. The HOA president claimed it was unauthorized. She ordered it towed while everyone was asleep. By morning, my neighbor was stranded, cold, panicked, and powerless. But she didn't expect one phone call to reach the sheriff. And she definitely didn't expect what came next. Because by the end of that day, the van was coming back, and she was the one being held accountable. The neighborhood had always been quiet. Not perfect but predictable. People knew each other's routines. Cars were parked in the same spots every night. Mornings followed the same rhythm, garage doors opening, kids heading to school, neighbors exchanging small nods as they passed. My neighbor had been part of that rhythm for years. He lived a few houses down from me, in a modest place with a short driveway and a clearly marked accessible parking space beside it. His van wasn't subtle. It was fitted with a ramp, hand controls, and medical decals that made it obvious why it existed. That van wasn't a convenience, it was independence. Without it, he didn't go anywhere. He couldn't just walk down the street. He couldn't hop in another car. Every appointment, every errand, every visit with family depended on that vehicle being right where it always was. And for years it had been. The HOA knew this. Everyone did. The van had never been an issue. It wasn't blocking traffic. It wasn't violating fire lanes. It wasn't abandoned. It was parked exactly where it was supposed to be, night after night, without complaints. That changed when the HOA board got new leadership. From the start, the new president brought a different energy. More enforcement. More warnings. More emails reminding residents that rules would now be applied consistently. She talked a lot about appearances, uniformity, order. At first it seemed harmless. Then the notices started. Cars being flagged for parking too close to curbs. Guests warned about overnight parking limits. Stickers placed on windshields with vague citations attached. It felt like the neighborhood was being watched more closely than before. Still, nothing involved my neighbor's van. Until one evening, a notice appeared on his door. It claimed the vehicle was in violation of HOA parking rules. No explanation. No reference to accessibility accommodations. Just a warning that continued non-compliance could result in enforcement action. My neighbor was confused. He reread it several times. He'd parked the same way for years. Nothing had changed. He planned to call the HOA office the next morning. He never got the chance. Because sometime after midnight, while the street was quiet and everyone was asleep, a tow truck rolled in. And by the time the sun came up, the van was gone. The realization hit immediately. When my neighbor opened his front door that morning and saw the empty space where his van should have been, he didn't panic at first. He stood there quietly, staring like his brain was trying to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. Then he asked me if I'd seen anything overnight. I hadn't. No note on the ground. No warning sticker left behind. No contact information taped to the curb. Just gone. He tried calling the HOA office. Straight to voicemail. He sent an email. No response. He checked his phone again and again, hoping someone would call back with an explanation. Meanwhile, the reality started sinking in. He had a doctor's appointment that morning. He had prescriptions to pick up. He had obligations that couldn't simply be rescheduled. Without that van, he was stuck inside his own house. And that's when the fear showed up. Not dramatic fear. Not yelling or anger. Just the quiet, suffocating kind that settles in when someone realizes their independence has been taken without warning. I walked down the street to see if anyone else had noticed. A few neighbors had. Some had heard a truck late at night but assumed it was routine. Others said they'd seen the HOA president's car parked nearby earlier that evening. By mid-morning, word had spread. People were upset. Not just because a car had been towed, but because of which car it was. The one that everyone knew mattered. The one that shouldn't have required an explanation. Someone finally reached the HOA president. Her response was cold. She said the vehicle violated parking rules. She said accommodations didn't override HOA authority. She said enforcement had been carried out properly. When she was asked why it happened overnight, she said enforcement schedules weren't required to be disclosed. When she was asked why no warning was given that night, she said a notice had already been issued. When someone mentioned the disability modifications, She said that wasn't the HOA's responsibility. That's when the tone of the neighborhood shifted. This wasn't about parking anymore. This was about someone deciding rules mattered more than people. I helped my neighbor start calling tow companies. It took hours to track down which one had taken the van. When we finally found it, the answer was worse than expected. The van had been impounded. Fees were already adding up by the hour. Storage costs, administrative charges, release requirements. And the earliest pickup window was days away unless the HOA authorized immediate release. Authorization she refused to give. She said he could retrieve it once fines were paid and compliance was confirmed. Compliance? As if a wheelchair ramp was optional. By early afternoon, my neighbor was exhausted. He sat at his kitchen table staring at his phone, unable to go anywhere, unable to solve the problem on his own. That's when someone suggested calling the sheriff's office. Not to complain. Not to escalate. Just to ask a simple question. Can an HOA legally do this? And as that call was placed, the pressure quietly shifted away from my neighbor, and toward the person who'd made the decision in the dark of night. The sheriff's deputy didn't show up with lights or sirens. He parked calmly at the curb and walked down the sidewalk, taking in the scene before anyone said a word. The empty space where the van should have been. The ramp marks still visible on the pavement. My neighbor sitting inside near the window waiting. The HOA president came out almost immediately. She didn't look worried. Not yet. She spoke confidently the same way she always did. She explained that the HOA had rules. That the vehicle was in violation. That enforcement had already been carried out properly and legally. The deputy listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't react. Then he asked a question that stopped her mid-sentence. He asked if the vehicle was modified for disability use. She said yes. He asked if the resident relied on it as his sole means of transportation. She hesitated, then said she assumed so. He asked if any emergency access had been blocked, or if the vehicle posed a safety hazard. She said no. The deputy nodded and asked for the towing paperwork. She handed it over confidently. He read it carefully. Then he asked her who authorized the tow. She said she did. That's when his tone changed. He explained very clearly that towing a disabled resident's primary vehicle without reasonable accommodation, without immediate safety justification, and without coordinating alternatives could constitute unlawful deprivation. He said it wasn't just an HOA matter anymore. He said it was a civil rights issue. Her face drained of color. She tried to argue. Tried to say HOA rules allowed enforcement. Tried to insist that accommodations didn't override compliance. The deputy stopped her. He said HOA rules do not override federal disability protections. He said overnight towing without emergency cause was reckless. And he said authorizing it personally exposed her to liability. Then he made the call. Not to the tow company. To his supervisor. Within minutes, the situation escalated beyond her control. The tow company was ordered to release the van immediately. Fees were waived. Transportation was arranged to return it the same day. The HOA was informed in writing that the tow was improper. Then came the consequence. The deputy informed her that she would be cited for improper authorization of a tow affecting a disabled resident. He explained the fine. He explained the documentation. And he explained that the incident would be reported. In front of neighbors. In front of witnesses. In front of the person she'd stranded overnight. She didn't argue anymore. She just stood there, realizing that her authority had ended the moment she decided rules mattered more than basic decency. Hours later, the tow truck returned. This time everyone watched. The van was lowered carefully back into place. The ramp unfolded. My neighbor finally rolled outside, relief written all over his face. The deputy waited until it was safely returned. Then he left. No drama. No celebration. Just accountability. And for the first time since the HOA president took power, the neighborhood felt something it hadn't in a long time. Safe. After the van was returned, the street stayed quiet. Not the awkward kind of quiet. The kind that comes after something has been corrected. People went back inside slowly. Conversations picked up again in low voices. Doors closed. Life resumed. But something had changed. The HOA president didn't issue any more notices that week. No emails about compliance. No warnings taped to doors. The tone that had once felt rigid and absolute was suddenly gone. In the days that followed, my neighbor finally caught up on what he'd missed. Medical appointments rescheduled. Prescriptions picked up. The simple routines that had been interrupted overnight were restored. He didn't talk much about what happened, but you could tell how deeply it had shaken him. Because it wasn't just about a van. It was about waking up and realizing how fragile independence can be when someone else decides rules matter more than people. The HOA held an emergency meeting shortly after. Attendance was higher than it had been in years. Residents asked questions. Direct ones. About accommodations. About towing authority. About who approved the decision and why no one had intervened sooner. The answers were uncomfortable. Vague. Defensive. But they weren't accepted. By the end of that meeting, new policies were announced. Disability accommodations were formally documented. Enforcement procedures were revised. And most importantly, towing authority was restricted, requiring multiple approvals and outside review. The HOA president didn't speak much after that. A month later, her name disappeared from the board listing. No explanation. No farewell message. Just gone. The neighborhood slowly relaxed again. Cars parked without fear. Guests stayed overnight without counting hours. And my neighbor's van remained exactly where it belonged, visible, respected, and untouched. What stayed with me most wasn't the fine, or the citation, or even the moment the sheriff stepped in. It was how easily it could have gone the other way. How a quiet overnight decision, made by one person with too much confidence and not enough empathy, could have caused real harm. HOAs exist to manage shared spaces. They don't own people's lives. And they don't get to ignore basic human dignity. That night reminded everyone of something important. Rules should protect communities, not punish the most vulnerable people in them. And the moment authority forgets that, it stops being authority at all.